Imagine a fighter aircraft so deadly that Allied pilots warned each other the moment it appeared in the sky. Fast, heavily armed, and ruthless in combat, it became the pride of Nazi Germany's Air Force. Many call it the best fighter Germany ever built. But history tells a different story. Because this fear machine would slowly lose control of the skies. Not because it was weak, but because it faced an enemy built to survive anything. This is the story of the Focke-Wulf 190 and how it was ultimately outmatched by the American P-47 Thunderbolt. Watch till the end, because this battle was not decided by speed alone, but by firepower, endurance, and survival. When the Focke-Wulf 190 first appeared over Europe in 1941, it shocked the Allied air forces. British pilots were experienced in fighting the Messerschmitt Bf 109. They understood its limits and knew how to counter it. But the FW-190 was something new, something unexpected. It was faster at low and medium altitudes, rolled quicker than the Spitfire, and delivered far more firepower in a single attack. Powered by a strong radial engine, the FW-190 was tough and reliable. Unlike liquid-cooled engines, its radial design could take hits and keep running. The aircraft had wide landing gear, making it safer on rough airfields, and a well-designed cockpit that gave pilots better visibility during combat. German pilots immediately felt confident flying it, and that confidence showed in battle. What truly made the FW-190 terrifying was its weapons. Early versions carried 4 20mm cannons along with 2 machine guns. This was far more firepower than most Allied fighters at the time. A short burst could destroy an enemy aircraft instantly. Bombers were especially vulnerable. Allied pilots quickly learned to respect and fear the FW-190. For a period of time, the Focke-Wulf 190 dominated the skies over Western Europe. German pilots achieved high victory counts, and Allied losses increased. Many believed Germany had finally built the perfect fighter. Compared to Bf 109, the FW-190 was easier to fly and more stable when firing its guns. It could dive well, climb reasonably fast, and fight aggressively at lower altitudes where many engagements occurred. The Luftwaffe proudly called it their best fighter. On paper, the claim seemed justified. But war is never static, and the air war over Europe was changing rapidly. By 1942 and 1943, the Allies shifted from defense to offense. American heavy bombers began flying daylight missions deep into occupied Europe and Germany. These bombers flew high in tight formations and were armed with multiple defensive guns. Stopping them became Germany's top priority. German fighters now needed to climb higher than ever before, intercept bombers protected by escort fighters, and survive intense defensive fire. The FW-190 could hit hard, but it was not designed for long, high-altitude combat. Its performance dropped as altitude increased, and its fuel endurance was limited. Then a new enemy arrived in the skies, one that looked nothing like the sleek German fighters. When German pilots first encountered the American P-47 Thunderbolt, many underestimated it. It was massive, bulky, and one of the largest single-engine fighters ever built. Some pilots even laughed, believing it would be slow and easy to defeat. That assumption would soon prove deadly. The P-47 was powered by an extremely powerful engine and built with survival in mind. It carried 8.50 caliber machine guns, firing thousands of rounds per minute. Instead of relying on precise cannon hits, the P-47 filled the sky with bullets. Even near misses could damage wings, engines, or pilots. Most importantly, the P-47 could absorb incredible damage. Pilots returned from missions with holes all over their aircraft, damaged engines, and missing parts, yet still landed safely. Many German fighters, including the FW-190, could not match this level of durability. At first, the FW-190 still held advantages at lower altitudes and in turning fights. But as American tactics improved and combat moved higher, the balance began to shift. The P-47 could dive faster than almost any fighter, attack with overwhelming firepower, and escape before German pilots could respond. The Focke-Wulf 190 was still dangerous, still respected, but the skies were changing, and the Thunderbolt was only getting started. The Focke-Wulf 190 was deadly, fast, and respected, German pilots trusted it with their lives. But the air war over Europe was no longer about quick dogfights near the front lines. It was becoming a brutal test of endurance, altitude, and firepower. And in this new kind of war, the strengths of the FW-190 were slowly turning into weaknesses. This is where the real struggle began. As American bombing campaigns intensified, the skies over Europe became more dangerous than ever. Hundreds of B-17 and B-24 bombers flew in tight formations, protected by escort fighters. These bombers were not easy targets. They were heavily armed, well-coordinated, and could destroy attacking fighters with defensive gunfire. The Focke-Wulf 190 was designed to hit hard, and it did exactly that. Its cannons were devastating. When a shell hit, the damage was severe. A single burst could tear apart a bomber or instantly destroy a fighter. German pilots used head-on attacks to maximize damage and reduce exposure to defensive fire. But there was a problem. Cannon ammunition was limited. Most FW-190s carried only a few seconds of firing time. If a pilot missed or fired too early, there was little chance for a second attack. Accuracy was critical, especially against fast-moving fighters and well-defended bombers. In contrast, the P-47 Thunderbolt approached combat differently. It relied on volume of fire rather than single devastating hits. Its 8.50 caliber machine guns fired hundreds of rounds per second. This created a wide pattern of bullets that increased the chance of hits even with imperfect aim. Gun camera footage from the war revealed an important truth. While cannon shells were powerful, they required precise hits. Machine guns, on the other hand, created a dense cloud of bullets that damaged aircraft systems, pilots, and control surfaces. Over time, this proved more effective in real combat. The P-47's massive ammunition supply allowed pilots to stay in the fight longer. They could fire repeated bursts, adjust aim, and attack multiple times in a single engagement. German pilots flying the FW-190 often had only one chance to make their attack count. Another major difference was durability. The FW-190 was tough for a German fighter, especially with its radial engine, but it was still relatively light compared to the P-47. American engineers had designed the Thunderbolt with survival as a priority. The P-47's airframe was extremely strong. It could absorb damage that would cripple or destroy most other fighters. Pilots frequently returned to base with large holes in their wings and fuselage. Some aircraft were missing entire panels, yet remained controllable. German pilots began to notice something alarming. Even when they scored hits on P-47s, the American fighters often kept flying. Engines kept running. Control surfaces still responded. The aircraft did not break apart easily. This had a psychological effect on Luftwaffe pilots. Seeing an enemy aircraft absorb heavy damage and continue fighting was unsettling. In contrast, the FW-190, while powerful, could not always survive the same level of punishment. Altitude also played a growing role. The P-47 performed better at high altitude thanks to its turbo supercharger. As bomber formations flew higher, the Thunderbolt maintained speed and power. The FW-190, especially early variants, struggled as altitude increased. Engine performance dropped, and climbing became more difficult. American pilots used this advantage carefully. Instead of turning fights, they preferred high-speed diving attacks. The P-47 could dive faster than almost any aircraft in the sky. Once it entered a dive, few German fighters could follow safely. This tactic became known as boom and zoom. The P-47 would dive from above, fire a massive burst, and then climb back to altitude. German pilots flying FW-190s often had little time to react. By the time they tried to turn or chase, the Thunderbolt was already gone. The Focke-Wulf 190 was still dangerous in the right conditions. At low altitude and in close combat, it could outmaneuver the P-47. Skilled German pilots used this to their advantage whenever possible. But the battlefield no longer favored those conditions. The war in the air was becoming one of endurance, protection, and sustained firepower. And slowly, the balance was tipping away from Germany's once feared fighter. The Focke-Wulf 190 was built to dominate dogfights, not to fight a long war in the thin air above Europe. As bomber streams climbed higher and escorts grew stronger, German pilots found themselves trapped in a battle their aircraft was never meant to win. And this is where the Thunderbolt began to take control of the sky. As the Allied bombing campaign expanded, altitude became one of the most important factors in air combat. American bombers often flew above 25,000 feet, where the air was thin and engines struggled for power. Fighters that could perform well at these heights gained a major advantage. The P-47 Thunderbolt was built for this environment. Its powerful turbo supercharger allowed the engine to maintain strength at high altitude. While many fighters lost speed and climbing ability, the P-47 remained fast and stable. This made it an ideal escort for bombers flying deep into enemy territory. The Focke-Wulf 190, especially early variants, struggled in these conditions. Its engine performed best at lower altitudes. As it climbed higher, power dropped, acceleration weakened, and responsiveness suffered. German pilots could still fight, but they were no longer fighting on equal terms. This created a dangerous situation for the Luftwaffe. To intercept bombers, pilots had to climb to extreme altitudes, often using full power for long periods. This put strain on engines and reduced fuel reserves before combat even began. Meanwhile, P-47 pilots arrived with more energy. They could choose when to attack and when to disengage. This control of the fight was critical. In air combat, the pilot who controls altitude and speed usually controls the outcome. American pilots were trained to avoid turning fights with German aircraft. Instead, they relied on speed, altitude, and firepower. The Thunderbolt would dive from above, unleash its guns, and then climb away. German pilots flying the WWII often tried to respond, but the P-47's diving speed made pursuit extremely dangerous. Many German pilots learned the hard way that chasing a diving Thunderbolt could be fatal. At high speeds, control surfaces stiffened and aircraft risked structural failure. The P-47, however, was designed to handle these extreme conditions. It could dive faster than almost any fighter in the war and still remain controllable. Gun camera footage and combat reports showed a clear pattern. P-47's attack was short, powerful bursts, often damaging wings, engines, or cockpits. Even if the German aircraft was not destroyed immediately, damage reduced its ability to fight or escape. The WWII still had strengths. At medium and low altitudes, it could roll quickly and turn tightly. Experienced German pilots used these qualities to try and force close combat. In rare cases, this worked. But these opportunities became fewer as Allied control of the skies increased. Another factor was fuel range. The P-47, especially later in the war, could carry drop tanks. This allowed it to escort bombers deep into Germany and stay with them for the entire mission. German pilots now faced enemy fighters not just near the front lines, but over their own cities and airfields. This constant pressure wore down the Luftwaffe. Pilots were forced to fight repeatedly, often with little rest. Training quality declined as experienced pilots were lost faster than they could be replaced. New pilots entered combat with fewer hours and less experience. In contrast, American pilot training continued to improve. Pilots gained experience through long escort missions and repeated engagements. Losses were replaced more easily thanks to superior industrial production and training systems. The Focke-Wulf 190 was still a dangerous aircraft in the hands of a skilled pilot. But skill alone could not overcome physics, numbers, and technology. The high-altitude battlefield favored the Thunderbolt, and that advantage grew stronger with each passing month. By late 1943, German pilots increasingly avoided combat with P-47s unless absolutely necessary. The once feared WWII was now fighting to survive in airspace that no longer belonged to it. The Focke-Wulf 190 was still deadly in skilled hands. German aces knew how to squeeze every bit of power from it. But even the best pilots in the world cannot win when the odds, the skies, and the system itself turn against them. This is the moment when experience started to fail and reality hit the Luftwaffe hard. At the beginning of the war, German pilots were among the most experienced in the world. Many had fought in Spain, Poland, France, and during the Battle of Britain. They entered combat with confidence, discipline, and skill. The Focke-Wulf 190 fit perfectly into their aggressive fighting style. Experienced pilots use the FW-190's excellent roll rate to change direction quickly. They attacked with speed, fired short bursts, and escaped before the enemy could react against poorly trained or surprised opponents. This worked extremely well, but by 1943, the situation had changed dramatically. German losses were increasing, and replacing pilots was becoming harder. Fuel shortages limited training hours. New pilots were rushed into combat with fewer flight hours and less combat preparation. Many barely understood their aircraft before facing experienced Allied pilots. Meanwhile, American pilot training was improving. Pilots were trained specifically for escort missions, formation flying, and teamwork. They learned not to chase kills, but to protect bombers and support each other. This discipline gave the P-47 squadrons a major advantage. Combat reports showed a clear difference. German pilots often fought alone or in small groups. American pilots fought as units. When one P-47 was attacked, others quickly moved to support it. This teamwork made it difficult for German pilots to isolate and destroy individual aircraft. The FW-190 was still capable of victory, but it required precise timing and perfect execution. A mistake meant death. Against large formations of P-47s, mistakes were inevitable. Another problem was mission fatigue. German pilots were flying multiple sorties per day. They took off knowing that they would face overwhelming numbers. Stress, exhaustion, and constant losses affected performance and morale. American pilots, on the other hand, rotated home after completing tours. Fresh pilots arrived with good training and high morale. Aircraft losses were replaced quickly. Germany could not match this pace. The battlefield itself was also changing. Allied fighters now control more airspace for longer periods. German airfields were attacked directly. FW-190s were often destroyed on the ground before they could even take off. This reduced the Luftwaffe's ability to choose when and where to fight. Pilots were forced into defensive missions, reacting to Allied attacks rather than controlling them. The P-47 played a key role in this phase of the war. Its toughness allowed it to fly dangerous missions, including ground attack and airfield strafing. P-47s destroyed fuel depots, aircraft, trains, and supply lines. This further weakened Germany's ability to sustain air operations. The FW-190 was also used for ground attack, especially in later variants. While effective, this exposed the aircraft to heavy anti-aircraft fire. Losses increased, and fewer fighters were available to defend against bombers. Over time, the Luftwaffe was forced to fight a war it could not win. Even when the FW-190 performed well in individual encounters, the overall situation continued to deteriorate. German pilots began to realize a painful truth. They were no longer fighting for air superiority. They were fighting simply to survive. The once dominant Focke-Wulf 190 had become part of a desperate defensive effort, and the Thunderbolt, backed by numbers, training, and industry, continued to tighten its grip on the skies. The Focke-Wulf 190 was designed to destroy enemies quickly. The P-47 Thunderbolt was designed to survive anything. And in a long, brutal air war, that single difference changed everything. Because victory in the sky was no longer about who hit first, but who came back alive to fight again. The Focke-Wulf 190 was a product of German wartime thinking. It focused on powerful weapons, compact design, and quick, decisive combat. Engineers believed that short, violent engagements would decide air battles. In the early years of the war, this approach worked. The aircraft was small, fast, and heavily armed. Its cannons could destroy a target with just a few hits. Against fighters and bombers alike, the FW-190 delivered devastating firepower. But this design came with limits. The aircraft carried limited ammunition. Once the cannons were empty, the pilot had little ability to continue fighting. Fuel capacity was also limited, reducing time over the battlefield. The aircraft was not designed for long escort missions or repeated attacks in a single sortie. The P-47 Thunderbolt represented a completely different philosophy. American engineers expected pilots to fly long missions, escort bombers deep into enemy territory, and return home safely. To do this, the aircraft had to be strong, stable, and reliable. The Thunderbolt's airframe was extremely robust. Thick wings, strong internal structure, and heavy armor protected the pilot and vital systems. The radial engine could absorb damage and continue running. Even when hit by cannon fire, many P-47 survived. This durability had a huge impact on combat outcomes. A damaged P-47 often returned to base, while a damaged FW-190 was more likely to be lost. Over time, this difference affected pilot survival rates and aircraft availability. Another key difference was firepower usage. The FW-190 relied on short, accurate bursts. The P-47 relied on sustained fire. 8.50 caliber machine guns allowed American pilots to fire longer and adjust aim during an attack. This flexibility made the P-47 more forgiving in real combat. Gun camera analysis showed that many kills were not caused by single fatal hits, but by accumulated damage. Control cables were cut. Engines lost power. Pilots were wounded. The Thunderbolt's volume of fire increased the chance of these results. The P-47 also carried external fuel tanks, extending its range. This allowed it to escort bombers far into Germany and remain in the combat zone for longer periods. German fighters could not wait for escorts to leave. They had to fight continuously. As the war progressed, P-47s took on additional roles. They became devastating ground attack aircraft. Using rockets and bombs, they destroyed railways, bridges, vehicles, and airfields. This further reduced Germany's ability to operate its fighters effectively. The FW-190 was also adapted for ground attack. While effective, these missions were extremely dangerous. Anti-aircraft fire was intense, and losses were high. Each lost aircraft meant fewer fighters available for air defense. Industrial production also played a critical role. The United States produced aircraft in enormous numbers. Lost P-47s were replaced quickly. Germany struggled to maintain production under constant bombing and resource shortages. Even when improved versions of the FW-190 entered service, the overall situation did not change. The aircraft remained dangerous, but it could not overcome the combination of American numbers, durability, and sustained combat ability. In the end, the Focke-Wulf 190 did not fail because it was a bad aircraft. It failed because it was built for a type of war that no longer existed. The P-47 Thunderbolt, built for endurance and survival, was better suited to the realities of the late war air battle. Even the best fighter cannot change the outcome of a war when it is outnumbered, outproduced, and outlasted. The Focke-Wulf 190 fought bravely, but was trapped in a numbers war that Germany had no chance of winning. And the P-47 Thunderbolt was backed by an industrial giant that never slowed down. As the air war over Europe intensified, aircraft performance was no longer the only factor that mattered. Production, logistics, and supply chains became just as important as speed and firepower. In this area, the difference between Germany and the United States was massive. The United States had enormous industrial capacity. Factories work around the clock, producing aircraft, engines, weapons, and spare parts in huge numbers. P-47 Thunderbolts rolled off assembly lines faster than they could be lost in combat. This allowed American commanders to accept losses without weakening their overall strength. Germany faced the opposite situation. Constant Allied bombing disrupted factories, transportation networks, and fuel supplies. Even when FW-190s were produced, getting them to operational units became increasingly difficult. Shortages of trained mechanics, spare parts, and fuel limited how often aircraft could fly. Fuel was one of Germany's greatest weaknesses. As synthetic fuel plants were destroyed, training hours were reduced. Pilots flew fewer practice missions and entered combat with less experience. Aircraft sat on airfields unable to fly, not because they were damaged, but because there was no fuel. The P-47 benefited from a steady and reliable supply system. Pilots could train properly, fly regular missions, and maintain their aircraft at a high standard. This consistency improved effectiveness and reduced non-combat losses. Numbers in the air also mattered. American fighters often appeared in large formations. Even if German pilots achieved surprise or scored early hits, they were quickly overwhelmed by sheer volume. For every FW-190 in the sky, there were often multiple P-47s. This numerical disadvantage forced German pilots into defensive tactics. They could no longer choose a time and place of combat. They reacted to Allied moves instead of controlling them. The P-47's reliability made this pressure constant. Thunderbolts escorted bombers deep into Germany, attacked ground targets, and remained over enemy territory for long periods. German pilots faced enemy fighters during takeoff, landing, and even while parked on airfields. The FW-190 was still a capable aircraft, but it was increasingly used in roles it was never designed for. Ground attack, emergency interception, and short-range defense missions became common. These missions increased losses and reduced the fighter force even further. Meanwhile, American tactics continued to improve. Fighter groups coordinated closely with bombers. Pilots shared information, adapted quickly, and used their aircraft strength effectively. Lessons learned were spread rapidly across units. Germany struggled to do the same. Communication breakdowns, loss of experienced leaders, and constant pressure made adaptation difficult. By the time new tactics or aircraft versions were introduced, the situation had already changed. Another important factor was pilot survival. P-47 pilots had a higher chance of returning home even when damaged. This meant experienced pilots survived to fight again. German pilots flying FW-190s were less likely to survive severe damage, leading to a continuous loss of experience. Over time, this created a downward spiral. Fewer experienced pilots led to higher losses. Higher losses reduced experience even further. No aircraft, no matter how good, could break the cycle. By late 1944, the outcome was clear. The Luftwaffe was fighting a defensive battle. It could not win. The Focke-Wulf 190, once the terror of Allied pilots, was now overwhelmed by numbers, fuel shortages, and constant pressure. The Thunderbolt did not win alone, but it played a critical role in a system designed for sustained, overwhelming air power. People often ask a simple question: which fighter was better, the Focke-Wulf 190 or the P-47 Thunderbolt? But war does not reward simple answers, because being better does not always mean winning. It means surviving, adapting, and lasting longer than the enemy. The Focke-Wulf 190 is sometimes described as a failure because it did not stop Allied air power. But this view is unfair. The FW-190 was never a weak aircraft. In many situations, it was deadly, efficient, and dangerous. At low and medium altitudes, the FW-190 could outmaneuver the P-47. Its roll rate was excellent, allowing quick direction changes. In the hands of an experienced pilot, it could force a Thunderbolt into a turning fight, where the heavier American aircraft struggled. German pilots who survived long enough to master the FW-190 achieved impressive victory counts. In isolated encounters, they could still defeat P-47s. Combat reports show that when conditions favored the FW-190, it performed well. So why did it lose control of the skies? The answer lies beyond individual performance. The FW-190 was fighting a system, not just another aircraft. The P-47 was part of a larger strategy that included bombers, radar, logistics, and overwhelming numbers. The Thunderbolt did not need to win every dogfight. It needed to protect bombers, survive engagements, and wear down the enemy. Even if a P-47 was damaged, it often returned home. Even if it failed to score a kill, it forced German pilots to react, burn fuel, and risk their lives. The FW-190, by contrast, was expected to achieve quick, decisive results. When that failed, losses mounted. Each lost aircraft and pilot weakened the Luftwaffe further. Technology also continued to evolve. The Allies improved radar, communication, and coordination. German defenses became increasingly reactive. The FW-190 was often sent into battle under poor conditions, against superior numbers and with little support. Another important point is that the P-47 was not the final answer. It was a stepping stone. Later in the war, aircraft like the P-51 Mustang would combine range, speed, and maneuverability. But before that, the Thunderbolt carried the burden of escorting bombers when no other fighter could. In that role, it succeeded. The FW-190 was not defeated in a single dramatic moment. It was slowly worn down. Day after day, mission after mission, the pressure increased. The aircraft's strengths were slowly neutralized by altitude, numbers, and tactics. Calling the FW-190 Germany's best fighter is not wrong, but being the best fighter does not guarantee victory. War rewards a side that can replace losses, protect pilots, and adapt faster than the enemy. The Thunderbolt represented this new reality. It was not elegant, it was not small, but it was reliable, powerful, and hard to kill. And in the long run, those qualities mattered more. The story of the FW-190 is not a story of failure. It is a story of an excellent aircraft facing impossible odds. And the story of the P-47 is not just about firepower, but about endurance and survival. History does not choose winners based on speed, beauty, or reputation. It chooses those who survive, adapt, and return to fight again. The final story of the Focke-Wulf 190 and the P-47 Thunderbolt is not about which aircraft was better on paper, but which one fit the brutal reality of total war. The Focke-Wulf 190 entered the war as one of the most advanced fighters in the world. When it appeared in 1941, it shocked the Allies and temporarily shifted the balance of air power. Its firepower, roll rate, and rugged design made it a fearsome opponent. In the hands of skilled pilots, it was deadly. For a time, the FW-190 truly earned its reputation as Germany's best fighter. But World War II was not decided in short, clean dogfights. It became a long, exhausting war of attrition. Air superiority was not about winning one battle. It was about winning thousands of missions in a row. This is where the FW-190 began to struggle. Germany lacked the fuel, training capacity, and industrial strength to support long-term air warfare. Pilots flew with less training. Aircraft were used in emergency roles. Losses could not be replaced fast enough. Even the best fighter could not overcome these realities. The P-47 Thunderbolt arrived as part of a completely different system. It was designed not just to fight, but to endure. It could escort bombers deep into enemy territory, survive heavy damage, and bring pilots home alive. Its 8 machine guns delivered massive firepower, and its strong airframe absorbed punishment that would destroy other aircraft. The Thunderbolt was not perfect. It was heavy and not ideal for tight turning fights. But it did not need to be perfect. It needed to be reliable. And it was. The P-47 helped secure air superiority by protecting bombers, attacking ground targets, and forcing German fighters into constant combat. Every mission drained German resources. Every engagement reduced experienced pilots. Slowly but surely, the Luftwaffe was worn down. The FW-190 did not disappear because it was inferior. It disappeared because it was outmatched by numbers, logistics, and a strategy built for long-term war. When people ask which fighter was better, the real answer is this. Both were excellent at what they were designed to do. The FW-190 was a powerful interceptor and dogfighter. The P-47 was a long-range escort and survivable combat platform. But war rewards the aircraft that fits the mission. The Thunderbolt fit the mission of Allied air dominance. Today, both aircraft are remembered with respect. The FW-190 stands as one of the finest fighters Germany ever built. The P-47 stands as one of the toughest and most effective American fighters of the war. Their clash in the skies over Europe was not just a battle between machines, but between two philosophies of warfare. One focused on quick destruction, the other on endurance and overwhelming power. And in the end, endurance won. If you liked our video, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so our next video can reach you.